Joe Biden made that decision to nominate a black woman to the Supreme Court, and the Republican Party, Republican pundits, conservatives in general are still losing their minds over this whole thing. As a matter of fact, over the weekend, now Mississippi Senator Roger Wicker, he went on the record specifically to talk about reasons why this just might not be a good idea. And you've heard these types of things before. Let's watch.
Because at the end of the day, you want to say she was the best of any ethnicity or any gender. And I can see their point of view on this one.
It's a very good point. The only thing is, it's exactly what Biden said he would do in his campaign. So he's just fulfilling a campaign promise, and he told the whole world that's exactly what he was going to do. The irony is that the Supreme Court is at the very same time hearing cases about this sort of affirmative racial discrimination.
Yes.
And while adding someone who is the beneficiary of this sort of quote, the majority of the court may be saying writ large it's unconstitutional. We'll see how that irony works out.
He speaks of irony. He's mentioned it a couple times there. The irony. You know what the irony is? The irony is that he called that racial discrimination. When you take a look at this chart of Supreme Court justices through American history, in case you can't see that, those really small things at the bottom, those are the now this is before Amy Coney Barrett, but now 7 people that aren't old white guys that are on the court. Of course, 5 of those now are women and 2 of those black men. So this nomination would then be the first black woman on the court, and look at how many brains have exploded as we see it going over and over and over again. And the talk about affirmative action is always one of those buzzwords, one of those dog whistles to make sure people know, hey, you know what we're talking about here? We're talking about unqualified, and she's a woman too, a black woman on top of all that. Now, oddly enough, there was one person from the Republican Party that was a bit more supportive of Joe Biden's decision. Let's watch this.
Put me in the camp of making sure the court and other institutions look like America. You know, we make a real effort as Republicans to recruit women and people of color to make the party look more like America. Affirmative action is picking somebody not as well qualified for past wrongs. Michelle Childs is incredibly qualified. There's no affirmative action component if you pick her. She is highly qualified. And President Reagan said, running for office, that he wanted to put the first female on the court. Whether you like it or not, Joe Biden said, I'm going to pick an African-American woman to serve on the Supreme Court. I believe there are plenty of qualified African-American women, conservative and liberal, that could go onto the court. So I don't see Michelle Childs as an act of affirmative action.
There's Lindsey Graham standing up for the decision to choose a black woman. Now there was one more piece. Jen Psaki, the press secretary for Joe Biden, also had to discuss this thing about reverse racism. Let's watch this.
Well, first we'd say that the fact that no black woman has been nominated shows a deficiency of the past selection processes, not a lack of qualified candidates to be nominated to the Supreme Court. I'd also note, I've heard that some conservatives may be fans of President Reagan, former President Reagan, and when he nominated Sandra Day O'Connor, he said, quote, Judge O'Connor's confirmation symbolizes the richness of opportunity that still abides in America. Opportunity that permits persons of any sex, age, or any race from every section and every walk of life to aspire and achieve in a manner never before even dreamed about in human history. I'd also note, if you look at the president's own record, not only has he nominated the highest number of black women to serve on the circuit court and the appellate court, but he has also nominated across the board the highest level of Ivy League nominees.
It's almost like Jen Psaki was prepared for that ridiculous question with actual information. So Adrian, this is the thing. So there's lots here. There was the Roger Wicker, of course, talking about affirmative action. Lindsey Graham, in my opinion, kind of standing up for it. And then Jen Psaki coming in with the inner. So what, in general, I mean, there's lots to go off here. I'm gonna let you go for what you think. is the most egregious thing that's happened here?
Oh gosh, I think all of it is egregious in terms of talking about qualified, and we have to make sure she's qualified. They only do that when it's a black or brown person. When it's a white male out there on the stage or the forefront leader, nobody's talking about qualifications, when we damn sure know that President Trump and a lot of these appointees that they have to the Supreme Court aren't quote unquote qualified. But no, it's the thought that white men are the most knowledgeable and best for the job and the most objective. And so it's essentially they're saying we're in a position to determine who is worthwhile to be on the court. Also, the way that Republicans totally misrepresent what affirmative action is just telling. The fact is that affirmative action is making up for essentially injustices of the past, but it has nothing to do with qualifications. It's just that Republicans want to say, oh, it's a bad thing because it means putting unqualified people in positions. That is such a falsity. In addition to that, the ones who have benefited the most of affirmative action are white women. Statistically, we know this to be true. Black and brown people and women of color are not the beneficiaries of affirmative action. It is white women. So that's largely the Sandra Day O'Connor situation. But it's tired of these racist rhetoric tropes just kind of going around and people saying, oh, it's about qualifications when you never say that about anybody else.
It's weird, but also affirmative action is the term that comes up when it specifically comes to black folks that get an opportunity when they didn't before. By the way, affirmative action, as it was supposed to be put, was supposed to help with minorities who don't get those opportunities in our system that has kept them from those opportunities. It's not just black folks, but it's like the welfare queens line that they've been pushing since forever. When they say welfare queens, are they talking about all the poor white folks that are on welfare? Because that is the majority. So it's always this buzzword, as I mentioned, the dog whistle, to make sure people know, hey, we're talking about those black folks who don't deserve to be in the positions that they're in, because they're just black people and we know how much lower they are. Everything is couched in this white supremacist language. And we're in it so much that a lot of times we don't even recognize it. So when people do point it out, it goes, how dare you keep talking about racism? Well, you talk about it every day. It's baked into what you're talking about when you say things like that. Affirmative action candidate who's not qualified. Even Lindsey Graham. So in his defense, and he's supposed to get some credit for this, he goes, we're gonna put in people for, I don't think she's one of those. First of all, she's one of the good ones. We're not gonna put one of those to right the wrongs of the past. The wrongs of the past in which country? I thought America has never done anything wrong in its past with any of its citizens, any of its minority citizens, any of its people that it's enslaved, people that they've pushed the judicial system against our entire existence here. What's with this opposition to critical race theory teachings in schools, which isn't happening, by the way? I thought everything was perfect here. If there's wrongs, Lindsey Graham, maybe you should point out to your colleagues who keep saying there were none. Again, we don't realize how we're saying the reality in discussions like this. But then when they have to actually talk about the wrongs of the past, they go, I didn't see anything, that didn't happen. Which one is it gonna be? It fits whatever narrative they need it to fit.
Exactly, and it's like anybody that Lindsey Graham promotes for the Supreme Court, I'm gonna pass on. I don't care how qualified, quote unquote, she is. But also something that I think is really unfortunate is the fact that if we're supposed to have a court that does truly reflect our nation, we need to have somebody on that bench that's not an Ivy Leaguer. I want a statey. I want one of us who are out there, because just because we couldn't necessarily afford it or get in the right channels and opportunities doesn't mean we're not intellectually sound and that our voices shouldn't be heard. Like, that classism is so incredibly omnipresent. It's even greater, I would say, than the racism and the sexism on that bench. It's straight classist.
Yeah, straight up. And my last point before we move on is we talked about diversity. Even then, and my last point on Lindsey Graham, because I know he's supposed to get some credit for this. We bring in diversity to show the American people we've got diversity. That's not the reason for diversity. That's the first problem in the first place. Bring in people to represent the American people that are there. We're not just a bunch of old white guys. So the reason for bringing in a black woman is not to say, I've got a black woman, and by the way, Democrats do it too, so let's not say it's not that. But the reason for it is they bring experience and expertise that other folks just don't have. Not from any fault of their own, because they can't live like a black woman, because they're not. Bring in someone who's had that experience, who's had those life lessons, and can bring some kind of a robust nature to the Supreme Court to represent the country, if you care about your country. Unless you think like Mitch McConnell thinks, those African Americans versus real Americans.